Hello. If you're interested in historical blackwork embroidery and would like pattern ideas but don't know exactly where to start, then welcome to the right place. But before we get started, please remember to select like if you like my video. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below and remember to subscribe. That way you will be updated when new videos come out. So, welcome to Historical Blackwork Patterns. First, I'm going to get started with Mamluk embroidery, which is Egyptian embroidery from the 9th through the 15th centuries. And the best place to find pattern ideas for this time period is to look in museums, or you can look on museum websites. Here is an example. It is a textile fragment with interlacing chevrons and Maltese crosses. And if you look where the circle where the red circle is, that's the pattern that I have interpreted and put the pattern on the right-hand side. You'll find with some museum websites, you can actually enhance the pattern big enough to where you can count the thread stitches. And this particular sample is at the Ashmolean Museum. And here's another example of Egyptian. This embroidery piece is at the V&A Museum in London. It's from circa, it says 1250 to 1560, so a bit of a wide time frame. But if you look, the pattern that I've interpreted on this page is the bottom trim. You'll see the red circle where that trim is, and I've enhanced the picture on the right, and then the pattern is below. And from that same piece that we just saw, this is the pattern that is just above it. It's also circled in red, and I've enhanced the picture on the right-hand side, and my interpreted pattern of it is beneath that. And this is all counted thread blackwork, not the circular blackwork that you find later in about 16th century, specifically 16th century English blackwork. Here's another example of Egyptian blackwork. This is a sampler fragment with a band of script, chevrons, and squares. It's from about the 14th century, and it's at the Ashmolean Museum. And again, this is one of the museums where you can pull up the picture and you can enhance the picture, zoom in, and you can count the threads. The sampler is on the left-hand side, and where the red circle is, that is the pattern that I have interpreted and put on the right-hand side. Here is another Egyptian example. This is at the V&A Museum. Again, it's from between 1250 to 1560. And instead of doing the whole large interlacing pattern, I only did the top half, but you can continue adding on to the pattern. So the pattern that was interpreted is inside the red circle, and that's on the left-hand side. And then the pattern that was interpreted is on the right-hand side. This is another example of Egyptian counted thread embroidery. This is a fragment from the neck opening of a tunic with crosses and diamond shapes. It's from between the 1250 to 1570. And it's at the Ashmolean Museum. Again, the pattern that was interpreted is inside the red circle on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side is my interpreted pattern. This is an Egyptian border. It's from about the 13th or 14th century. It is currently located at the Art Institute of Chicago. And the pattern that I interpreted is inside the red circle, and it's at the top of the left-hand, or the top of the picture on the left-hand side, and the interpreted pattern is on the right. And like I said before, you can enhance some of these pictures online, enhance it to the point where you can actually count the threads. It helps when counting the threads. You can see dark spots in between the light threads. So if you see a dark spot, thread, and another dark spot, thread, dark spot. Each dark spot is a stitch where the thread has gone through the fabric. It makes it easier when you find pieces, which I will show you later, where some of the threads are missing, but because it's counted thread and you can follow the pattern, you can recreate the pattern even though half of the threads are missing. Here's another example of Egyptian embroidery. This is from about the 14th century, and it is at the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. And the pattern that I interpreted is inside the red circle, and that's on the left-hand side, and then the pattern itself is on the right-hand side. And this is an example where you can see some of the threads are missing, but even though the threads are missing, you can zoom in, enhance the picture, and you can see where the holes were, and also know that the embroidery where you can see the stitches, the top upside down triangle is a reflection of part of the missing triangle on the bottom, so you can use it as a mirror image from the top to the bottom. Now, onto European embroidery. This does say 15th to 17th centuries, but primarily I'm going to be focusing on the 16th and 17th centuries. Here is an Italian example. This is from an embroidery book, and on the left-hand side is a page from the embroidery book. It's by Zappino. It was written in August 1529. It's currently at the Met Museum, and I interpreted the acorn pattern. If you look at the very top of the left-hand side of the page, you'll see the acorn pattern, and that's the pattern on the top right. And then in the middle of the page on the left, you'll see it looks like double crosses, kind of going up and then down, up and then down. And I've interpreted that pattern as well, and that's on the bottom right. This is another page from that same book, and I've interpreted the pattern. If you look, the second pattern down on the left-hand side, where it looks like two triangles, one upside down and one right side up, and then a little line, and then crosses reflecting off of each other, and then triangles again. That's the pattern on the top right. And then if you count down, see, 1, 2, 3, 5 patterns down, you'll see it looks like a reflection of crosses on the top and the bottom. That is the pattern that I have interpreted on the bottom right side. This is from an embroidery book from 1530. It is by Tagliente, and it is at the Met Museum. The patterns that I interpreted from this page, the pattern near the top of the page is on the top left-hand side of the page. And then, do you see the double cross pattern on the bottom left? It's about the middle of the page on the right-hand side, that double cross pattern. Let me go back. Do you remember this from 1529? Do you see the pattern on the bottom right from 1529 by Zappino? Yet Tagliente did it in 1530. At this time, if you look at certain books, you'll find that they reused the ink presses for different books. They just shuffled up the pages. That's also why if you look in recipe books from this time period, you will find the recipes might be the same. They've just been put in a different order, added in a couple new recipes, and voila, they have a new book. This is an embroidered sampler at the Met Museum. It's from about 1600, and the pattern that I am interpreted on this page is inside the red circle. It's near the top right-hand side of the sampler, and I've enhanced the embroidery on the top right of the page. And this is an example where you can see some of the stitches are missing, but because it's counted stitch, you can count the threads where they're missing and fill in the line and create the pattern, which I've interpreted and created below. This is from the same sampler, and inside the red circle on the left-hand side is the pattern I interpreted. On the right-hand side is an enhanced picture of that pattern, and again, some of the threads are missing, but because it's counted stitch, we can count where the stitches are missing and find what the pattern would have looked like, and that's what I've put on the bottom right-hand side of the page. from the same Italian sampler, inside the red circle is the pattern that I've enhanced in the middle of the page, and then I've interpreted it and put it on the right-hand side. This particular one, if you notice, some of the threads don't line up quite neatly, and so you can actually count the stitches, because instead of being one continuous line, you'll see where the threads tend to sit next to each other in the same hole, and that helps with counting how many holes in between each stitch, as well as how many stitches per section of the pattern. And this is still the same Italian sampler we've been looking at, and inside the red circle on the top left-hand corner is the pattern that I recreated on the right-hand side. I've enhanced the picture, and then beneath that, because on the sampler it just had that one, what would you call it, cornstalk, but there was only one, but because of the line at the bottom, this is a pattern that you can add and add and add and create trim around, say, a collar or a cuff. So for the pattern on the bottom, I've put 3 side by side. And from the same embroidered sampler, inside the red circle near the top of the sampler, I have enhanced that picture and then recreated the pattern below. This is another example where the threads are missing in part of the pattern. Actually, if you look near the bottom left corner of the picture in the middle, you'll actually see the thread sitting up on top of the sampler. But this is because it's counted stitch. You can fill in the dots. Think of it like connect the dots. You can fill in the blank spaces and recreate the pattern that was on the sampler. And still the same Italian sampler. Inside the red circle, I've enhanced the picture, and this is very much a case of connect the dots because half the thread is missing. Again, it's counted stitch, so you can count the threads where they're missing and recreate the pattern. And that's what I've done on the bottom right-hand side, is a recreation of the pattern that is found on this Italian sampler. And still working with the same Italian sampler, there were many patterns on this sampler, so it's a great piece to look at. And I've enhanced the picture on the right-hand side and then recreated the pattern below. And once again, if you look on the far right-hand side of the enhanced picture, you'll see part of the threads are missing, but because it's a mirror image from the left side to the right side, you can still recreate that image when creating your pattern. And still working with the same embroidered sampler, I've enhanced the picture on the right-hand side and recreated the pattern below. And here's one more example of a pattern from that embroidered sampler, and I've recreated the pattern, posted it below, and I have even more patterns from this sampler. If you would like to see more patterns, please visit the website on the top left-hand side. Other examples of Italian blackwork from the 16th century is this embroidered fabric. It is at the Museo del Tessuto. If I mispronounced that, please correct me. Inside the red circle on the left-hand side, I have recreated that pattern and put that pattern on the right-hand side. And on that same sampler, you'll see it has a flower inside the red circle, and then I've recreated that pattern and put that on the right side as well. I have other patterns from this sampler. Please follow the link on the top left-hand side. This is an enhanced picture of a much larger sampler at the V&A Museum. It's from the 16th century. And inside the red circle on the bottom right-hand side of the picture on the left, I have included the 2 patterns that are there, and they're in the middle and the bottom right of the page. Now that we're done with Italian, let's work with a little bit with English embroidery. This is, at least in the SCA, it seems to be a very popular, before I forget, the SCA, that's the Society for Creative Anachronism. If you want more information, please visit sca.org. But this is a popular sampler. It is Jane Bostock's sampler from 1598. It's at the V&A Museum, and this is the sampler on the left-hand side. And inside the red circle is the enhanced picture that I have in the middle, and then on the right-hand side is my interpretation of that pattern. This is a painting of Margaret Roper. She was the oldest daughter of the oldest daughter of Sir Thomas More. Her maiden name was Margaret More, and then got married and became Margaret Roper. This painting was done about 1535 to 1536, and it's at the Met Museum. This is another way of finding blackwork patterns. Instead of just simply studying samplers that exist, you can also go to paintings, and especially the Holbein paintings. You can look at some museums, you can enhance the painting and figure out the pattern. You may not be able to count the stitches like you can on an actual sampler, where you can count the missing threads or the number of holes between a stitch, but you can still get the concept of the pattern. And then depending on if it's a sleeve with a really large pattern, if it's a collar with a smaller pattern, you can kind of guesstimate if it was every third hole for a stitch, or if it was every fifth hole for a stitch, if it's a larger pattern. So with this painting of Margaret, I have enhanced her collar in the middle picture, and then I have included my interpretation of that pattern of her collar on the bottom right-hand side. This is a miniature painting of Elizabeth, Lady Audley, from about 1538. It's with the Royal Collection Trust. And with this one, you can see right along the trim, right around the edge of her dress, she's got, it looks like blackwork trim, but because it's a miniature, I'm sure it was difficult to get all the brush strokes just exactly right to get the pattern, but the painter got the basic idea of the pattern. And with that, I recreated what I think the pattern looks like, and that's on the bottom right-hand side. And this is from a sampler at the V&A Museum. It's by, I believe her first name was Sarah Blake. It was done in 1664, and as you can see on the left-hand side, it is very long, very detailed, lots of patterns to study, which is why I color-coded the different patterns so you can have an idea of where to find this specific pattern on this sampler. And this is a case where you can go to the museum website, enhance the picture, and zoom in and actually be able to count the stitches for that pattern. And I have other patterns from this sampler. If you would like to see more patterns from this sampler, please visit my blog. The link is below on the right-hand side. This is, it was done by a German painter. It's Holbein, Hans Holbein the Younger. But I've included it with the English paintings because even though the painting is labeled as Portrait of a Boy with a Marmoset, it's labeled as being from about 1532 to 1535. It's located at the Kunstmuseum. But with this portrait, you will find, if you look up, just do a Google search and look up Edward VI, you will find this painting associated with him. But if you look up Henry Fitzroy, you might also find this painting associated with him. No one knows for sure who this boy is. That's why the painting in the museum is just labeled as being Portrait of a Boy with a Marmoset. But they have it between 1532 to 1535, which to me automatically rules out that it could be Edward VI, because Edward VI wasn't born yet. If memory serves correctly, he was born in 1537, because Anne Boleyn died in 1536. That is when Henry VIII, King Henry VIII, the famous king with 6 wives of England, married his third wife, Jane Seymour, in 1536. She soon became pregnant and then gave birth in 1537 to Edward, who later became Edward VI. But depending on other websites you look at, I have found some websites that associate the year 1541 to this picture. So if he was born in 1537, there might be that chance in 1541 that this could be him, but I still think he looks older than that. If it's Henry Fitzroy, there is a better chance of that because Henry Fitzroy was the illegitimate son born to Bessie Blount, the one recognized illegitimate child that Henry VIII was willing to recognize. And Henry Fitzroy was born in 1519. So if he was born in 1519 and this was painted between 1532 to 1535, then this, to me, looks more like a boy who could be 12, 13, 14, not a boy who hasn't been born yet or a boy who's barely 5. But regardless of which boy it is, if you look at the collar, you can enhance the picture, which I've done on the right-hand side, and you'll see there's like a little ocean wave picture with a line on the bottom and a line on the top. And I've recreated that pattern on the bottom right-hand side. Now on to Portuguese embroidery. This is a page from a booklet of embroidery and drawn work. It's from the 17th century and it's at the Met Museum. And the particular pattern on this page that I have interpreted is inside the red circle on the left-hand side. And I've flipped the picture so it's sitting parallel rather than perpendicular to the ground. It's on the right-hand side. And this is a really good case of, if you look at the lines on the top right side, the picture on the top right side, you'll see on the line, you'll see dark dots every so often. That tells you every dark dot is a stitch. So even though we can't zoom in enough to count the holes in between each stitch, you can tell how many stitches, like if you look on the top of one of those bubbles, or if you want to call it a curve, on top of one of those curves, there are 4 dots. That tells you 4 dots, that's 1 stitch, 2 stitch, 3 stitch, and then you go back down on the curve. So I was able to recreate the pattern on the bottom right side. This is an example of German embroidery. It is from a German embroidery book from 1597 written by Siebenmacher. And although this is not a blackwork pattern, the pattern on the right side was inspired by the pattern on the left because it was from an embroidery book and it is a German pattern. So you can use patterns that existed for, say, brick stitch, and if you want to use it to inspire you to create a blackwork pattern. This is a painting at the Kunsthistorisches Museum. It was painted in 1531, and this is an example of where you can zoom in on the collar and you can study the pattern and recreate it. Can you count the stitches? No, but you can get a basic idea of what the pattern looks like and then recreate it, which I've done on the bottom right side. This is an example of embroidery from the Netherlands. This is a portrait of a young woman from about 1535. It's currently at the Met Museum. And this, if you look at the painting, you can zoom in, you can see blackwork along her collar, along the top part of her shirt, but also along her sleeves and around the cuffs. The problem is, as you zoom in, the pattern starts to become blurred, as you can see on the right-hand side. So it's not perfect, it's not as good as the Holbein paintings, but you can still get a basic concept of what the pattern looks like, which I've recreated on the bottom right side. And for some other embroidery, have you heard of kasuti embroidery? Here is an example on the right-hand side from kasuti patterns, and it is Indian embroidery, which looks, oddly enough, like Egyptian embroidery or blackwork embroidery, or we can call it Holbein stitch, reversible stitch. It's all the same thing. It's counted stitch that is reversible on both sides. Well, most times reversible on both sides. Kasuti embroidery dates back to the, if I mispronounce this, I'm sorry, please correct me, Chalukya period from the 6th to the 12th centuries in India. So if you like blackwork embroidery, I highly recommend checking out this embroidery, and I've got the website link at the end. right here. If you have questions, if you're interested in paintings or samplers that you saw, here are the websites to look at. And then here are more websites to look at. For the kasuti patterns, that's the second one on this page. If you're interested in studying Indian embroidery, that is just like the European blackwork, if it's just like the Mamluk embroidery. And please remember to subscribe. Click like if you like this video. If you have questions or comments, please post them below. And thank you for watching. I hope this was helpful in helping you find patterns that inspire you, that are of a historical nature, to create or recreate your blackwork embroidery.